Okay, everybody, welcome back. So in this section, we're going to start taking a look at our vocal tracks. We're probably going to break this up into a couple of different sections to keep the video somewhat short. So we're going to take a look at part of the background vocals for this one here. So if you look at our edit screen here, I've now changed these background vocals to this kind of lime green color. Reason being is that these four background vocals are doing exactly the same thing, singing the exact same parts. In the exact same octave. So we have two, they just kind of sang, or she just kind of sang the vocal 4 times to give it a bigger, thicker feel. So we're probably just going to pan 2 of them to the left and 2 of them to the right to keep it easy, but you don't have to do that. You can eliminate some tracks in your mix if you want to, or you can put everything right up the center, however you want to do it. But I'm going to pan them hard left and hard right. And what we're going to do is just a way to change pace to show you guys something, another, kind of a tip here, is right now we have these 4 background vocals all having their own separate track, and they all have their own separate plugins on them, which again is the tape machine, the virtual console, and the channel strip. But because this vocal is just really 4 unison tracks together, we're going to send these to a VCA and we're going to process them all on one track just for ease of use. Again, you don't have to do it this way, but just another way to show you. So the way we're going to do that in Studio One here is we're going to highlight all 4 of these tracks here, backgrounds vocals 3 through 6, and we're going to right click and we're going to say add a VCA for all selected tracks. And as you can see, it puts a VCA track here. And we can do it that way. Or actually, that's probably not what we want to do. I'm not sorry, not a VCA, because a VCA is not going to allow us to put any processing on it. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to remove that VCA. And we're just going to put these to a group track, which we already kind of have here on our bus. So what we can do is all our background vocals are going to a background vocal bus. So maybe what we can do is put a background vocal 1 and a background vocal 2 bus, 2 separate buses, and process them that way. Okay, so let's do that. So we're gonna call this background vocal bus, and we're gonna call this background vocal bus 1. And then we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna add another bus channel for the other background vocals. We'll call this background vocal bus 2. Okay, and then we'll make sure we're routing everything to the proper place now. So the background vocals that we're going to look at are going to be background vocal 3 through 6. We're going to route those to background vocal bus 1, which they are, okay? And then we're going to take the other background vocals, which we'll look at in maybe later in this video or the next video, depending on how long this is, and we'll put those to background vocal bus 2. And again, because they're in different sections of the song and singing different parts, again, you can put them all to one or the other. Again, I'm just showing you one way to do this. There's a million ways you can do this. You can do what I originally did, which is put all the background vocals to one bus and process them all together, or you can break them up like this, however you want. Or you can process them all on the individual tracks as I originally had set up, or you can do what we're going to do now, which is separate them. Okay, try not to confuse you, just trying to show you a couple of different ways of doing things. Okay, so we're going to look at right now just the background vocals here in green. Okay, so background vocal bus 1. And what we're going to do is we're going to put all the processing on the bus as opposed to the individual channels, again, just to keep things simple. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the plugins on these 4 tracks here. So we're going to remove the tape machine. Actually, we're going to remove all of them. Right? No, we're going to remove everything on these tracks. Okay, so all the plugins are gone. And what we're going to do is we're going to put those plugins on background vocal bus 1 track. Okay, so we're going to start off with the tape machine, which we already have. And then we're going over to the virtual mix bus, which is what we already have. And then we're going to put an SSL channel strip on. Now we got to make sure, keep in mind if you're using universal audio plugins or Waves plugins, that you want to make sure that we're putting the stereo version of the plugin, because it's a stereo bus track as opposed to what it was before on the individual tracks, which was mono. So we're going to go over here to that's Neve. We're going to go over to the SSL. Where is it? Okay, here we go. Okay, the stereo version, and we're going to put that here. Okay, so we'll get to that in a second, but that's what we're going to do. So we're going to solo up these tracks, which I've already done here. We're going to loop this section just so you can hear what's going on here. And again, I'm going to pan them hard left and hard right, and then we'll start processing them on the bus. Okay, so let's do that.
I always thought I'd never lose you. I won't change just to suit you.
Pretty straightforward, right? Okay, so there's 4 lines, and they do this, or she does this a couple of times throughout the song, as you can see, towards the end here, and in the second chorus, or even in the choruses only. So that's what we're going to do. So let's go ahead and let's start looking at our tape machine. We'll open up the bus here.
Or see me running through the hayfields. I won't change just to suit you.
Okay, so we're not slamming it too hard. We're pegging it a little bit, but not a big deal. Now we're going to go over to the channel strip here, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to flip it, and we're going to go on to the mic input. We're going to turn our compressor on. Now on the background vocals, we're going to stay with a slow attack because, again, the fast attack on this particular plugin is super fast. And I don't want to overly compress it again, like we talked about earlier. I'm going to go to like a 2-to-1 ratio because, again, later on when we add some extra additional processing in a couple of sections down the road, you'll understand why. So again, real light compression. We're going to do a fairly quick release here, slow attack. We're going to roll off somewhere around 100 hertz just to clean up the bottom end. Let's turn down this fader here so we don't blast ourselves out, and let's see what we're getting for compression.
I always thought I'd never lose you. I won't change just to suit you. Or see me running through the hayfields. I won't change just to suit you.
Okay, again, so about 3 dB of compression. Now, from an EQ point of view, right now I think it sounds okay. I'm not going to touch it. I'm going to put it in the context with the mix. We may brighten up these vocals a tiny bit. I don't hear any real sibilance issues. So from an EQ perspective, right now I'm not even going to add any EQ. When we bring the rest of the mix in, we may decide to do so. But all we've done is a little bit of 3 dB of compression. Before and after, you can hear the difference here. I'll start with it before, and I'll bring the plugin in.
I always thought I'd never lose you. I won't change just to suit you.
I'm going to try a fast attack now because I feel like that first thing is popping out a little too much. And again, I should be doing this in the context of the mix, which we'll do. I'm just wanting you to hear the differences. So let's try a fast attack. Now with a fast attack, you're going to see a lot more compression before I turn back the threshold.
Or see me running through the hayfields. I won't change just to suit you.
So now we're doing about 6 dB of compression, but I still feel like that note is kind of popping out a little too much. So I'm going to try to compress it more here. Let's try to go 6 to 10 dB of compression and see what that does.
I always thought I'd never lose you. I won't change just to suit you. Or see me running through the hayfields. I won't change just to suit you.
Okay, so it tames it a little bit more. And you can see on the heaviest dynamic part of the note, we're getting about 10 dB of compression. Now we can turn up the ratio a little bit. That's going to give us even more compression. Again, let's experiment with that. Let's turn it up to, say, a 4-to-1 ratio. So it was a 2-to-1 ratio, 4-to-1 ratio. We're going to leave the threshold alone. Let's see how much compression we're getting.
I always thought I'd never lose you. I won't change just to suit you.
So you see we're getting at least 10 dB of compression just by turning up the ratio, and you can hear how much quieter it's starting to get. So before the plugin,
or see me running through the hayfields. I won't change just to suit you.
okay, so we don't have a really big volume difference. So we kind of level match the plugin by turning this down, the fader down a little bit. And that's actually starting to sound better to my ear because it's starting to sound a little more even, and I don't hear the very first word of every phrase popping out at me. So now, again, this is how you kind of experiment with this stuff. But the true test is let's bring the instrumentation in and let's hear what it's doing. Let's hear if it sounds nice and even and smooth, which is kind of what we want. And we want it to sit on top of the mix. So we're going to have to turn up the volume maybe a little bit. So let's see where we are. So if we go back here and we bring in our drums, bass, and guitars and pianos, here's what we have with these background vocals. Now we may have to turn up the volume on the bus. Okay, so we got to get some more volume out of this. You can see we're at like a negative 12 dB even after the compressor. So I'm not getting a lot of throw on this fader. So I'm going to lower this back down. And what we can do is we can just turn the output of the plugin up here. Let's turn this back up and see what we get. Okay, so now it's sitting on top of the mix, and I've had to turn up the output of this plugin quite a bit to get the volume up. Now, part of the problem is because, again, this track was recorded very conservatively. I can see it. Now, I could gain stage it on the front end. I could turn up some clip gain here to get a little more signal going into the plugin to begin with. You know, again, it's 6 1 half and dozen of the other, okay? But we're just going to turn up the output of the channel strip here. We're going to achieve the same thing. Now, again, we're getting about 10 dB of compression here, which is cool. It sounds a little bit more smooth now, which is what I wanted. I'm also feeling like that it could be a little bit brighter now that I bring the rest of the band in. So maybe I'll play with a little bit of EQ and give it a little bit of air, maybe around this, 12K mark, just to see what will happen. I'll put a little bit of a shelf on it. I want shooting stars to suit you. I always thought I'd never lose you. I want shooting stars to suit you. I see me running through the hayfields. I want shooting stars to suit you. Okay, so by turning up to the low cut a little bit and getting a little bit more of the low end out of there, it kind of it takes some of the muddiness out of those background vocals. Because again, this is a cumulative thing across 4 different tracks with one plugin, right? So by rolling it off a little bit higher, it cleans up the bottom end a little bit, and you hear the top end a little bit more. Does that make sense? So I can back off the EQ a little bit. So as I'm rolling up, and I'll do this, we'll play this back a couple of times, and I'll take the low cut and I'll just tweak it up and down so you can hear how the background vocal now gets a little bit more muddy when I have more low end in. So I originally was rolling it off around 90 hertz. I've cranked it up to about 200, and it gave it more clarity. I won't change stars to suit you. I see me running through the hayfields. I won't change stars to suit you. Okay, so hopefully you can hear that there. It's subtle, but it's certainly there. Again, just to clean up the bottom end a little bit. So now we got, again, about 10 dB of compression. We got the background vocals kind of sitting on top of the mix. They might be a little bit loud. We may need to turn them down just a tiny bit. We don't have the lead vocal in there yet. Again, we're just doing this kind of in isolation. So I'm going to turn that back down a little bit. But we've cleaned it up, okay? And we saved ourselves some CPU processing power because we're not putting all those analog plugins across 4 channels. We're just doing it on 1. Okay, so that's one way to combat if you have a slower computer. And when we start talking about these analog plugins, like we've talked about in prior sections, depending on which ones you use, they can suck up a lot of your CPU or your DSP power if you're using universal audio. One way to do that is to combine tracks where you can and just process them on a group or on a bus as opposed to each individual track. And something like these background vocals, that's pretty helpful because she's singing the same part, right? So there's no reason to process them separately. You can do it all as one. Now let's take a look at these other background vocals while we're here, because we have the same thing going on. Over here in the orange tracks, you can see that it's the same thing you could just tell by looking at it. The only difference is towards the end, you can see this is a lot louder than on the front end. So we can adjust that with some clip gain. So why don't we do that? Why don't we go ahead, and this is going to be background vocal 1 bus now, remember, or background vocal 2, right? So, because we're going to bus those over. So now we're going to solo up background vocal 2. We'll mute everything else for now, just so we can hear those in isolation. And let's hear what background vocal 2, which is the background vocals in orange, are doing. So over here at the end of the song.
You can't stand, I smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think. Lie.
Okay, so you have kind of a little higher vocal and a lower vocal there. So again, we got them panned hard left and right, and we can start with them panned hard left and right because it's in between these other vocals that we just worked on. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make sure that from a clip gain perspective, this is a little bit louder here at the end than in the beginning. So I'm just going to turn these up a couple of dB here, just to, I'm going to eyeball it, right? That's all I'm doing here. Again, we're not changing the face of modern music by doing this. We're just going to eyeball it a little bit just to get them so they're right around the same volume level here. We're going to go ahead. We're going to shrink these back down. Okay, and we'll do the same thing. We'll just do it on the bus. Okay, so what we'll do is we will remove these plugins across the tracks. And I know I'm kind of taking it a long way around here, but I'm doing this for just, for my beginners that may not know that we could do this. So we're going to bring the mix tool over here. Again, we're going to just copy the same plugins, the tape machine. Okay, that's going to go over here as well. The virtual console collection, the mix bus, and then we're going to throw the universal audio channel strip over there again as well. We'll just save all this. We'll turn off the channel strip for now because we're going to process that a little separately because she is singing something different. We're going to loop this and let's just see what we hear here.
You can't stand, I smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think. You can't stand, I smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think. You can't stand, I smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think. You can't stand, I smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think. You can't stand, I smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think. You can't stand, I smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think. You can't stand, I smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think. You can't stand, I smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think.
Okay, so a lot of the settings are the same. I took back the compression a little bit, but you can tell before and after the plugin, we just have a little bit of more brightness on the top, a little bit more air at around that 12 to 14K mark, just about 6 dB. And we're compressing about 6 to 10 dB to kind of even out that performance. But once again, let's see what it sounds like with the rest of the mix, and then we'll tweak it in from there. Okay, so this is just a down and dirty way to kind of get these background vocals, which were tracked fairly well, to get them to just sit nice. That's all we're trying to do. So if we bring in the rest of our band here, pianos without the lead vocals, here's what we got.
You can't stand, I smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think. You can't stand, I smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think. You can't stand, I smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think. You can't stand, I smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think. You can't stand, I smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think. You can't stand, I smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think. You can't stand, I smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think.
Okay, so I've turned down the compression a little bit to about 6 dB again, not trying to overcompress unless we really need it. This vocal's a little bit more even. You don't have the first word of each phrase popping out at you like we did on the last vocals. So again, let's be a little conservative with our compression. Even though we're doing a fast attack 4-to-1 ratio, about 6 dB of compression, just to get them to sit in the mix. And now it sounds like it's fairly balanced. Again, it's a little loud because I want you to hear it, so I'll probably adjust the volume of the bus.
You can stand, I smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think. You can stand, I smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think.
Okay, not too bad. That's a good place to start. Okay, so now we got our background vocals taken care of. So the last part of this video, let's take a listen to our lead vocal 2, which I believe is the chorus here. And then we'll probably end this video at that point, and we'll go over to the next video to really focus on the lead vocals. But let's just kind of listen to this. Okay, so it's the lead vocal on the chorus is what it is. So we have the lead vocal on the verse and the lead vocal on the chorus. What we'll do is we'll do that in the next section here to keep these sections somewhat short. So what we're going to do is we're going to just listen to this mix now quickly without the lead vocals there. We'll process that in the next video, as I just mentioned. Well, let's listen to the rest of the band here. Let's kind of listen from beginning to top towards the bottom. Let's just go ahead and check our master fader out. Now that we've done these groups of instruments, let's just kind of, balance everything a little bit more. Again, we're coming back. We're doing these sections, over the course of several days. And so I'm listening now with a more fresh set of ears. And along the way, I'm always tweaking the mix and balancing it and trying to get to the final product as much as possible. So let's take a listen from the top of the song now that we've done a lot of processing. And let's go ahead and we'll just balance things. I'll check the master bus, and then we'll come back for the next section, which will be the lead vocal. Okay, so one note that I'll think about, and we can maybe do this right now, is that very first guitar is already panned all the way to the hard right, because when the second guitar kicks in throughout the rest of the song, we have that guitar on the right. So, but on the intro, we probably want to bring that guitar to the center, right? So if we were to scroll out here, you could see here, this lead guitar, or this second guitar, which is now panned hard right, we ought to put a little automation on that and put it towards the center until that second guitar kicks in. So there's a couple of ways you could do that. You can either just use your blade tool, cut this section out and put it on its own separate track, or we could just do some quick automation here, which is what we're going to do. We're going to use the pan, not the volume. And basically what we're going to do, we'll move it up here so we could see it. And so here is we're panned all the way to the right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring this to the center. We're going to start off in the center. And then once we get to the ends, which is right over here where this other guitar kicks in, right about there, at that point we want to be back all the way over to the right. Okay? So we're going to go ahead and we're now going to put a point here, and then we'll put a point here, and then we'll bring it all the way back over to the right. So it just does a sharp far right. So, and then it's on, now you can see that track automation says read, and here's what we get. Okay, so that's a little trick for you there. You just go ahead and we'll just, it'll just help us with the beginning of that song, so it doesn't sound like that we're beginning of the song, all you hear is stuff coming out of the right speaker. We don't want to do that. Now, one thing they did in tracking here is I see that they really kind of cut this really close in the beginning here, and we got a little bit of a fade in here happening. They didn't give us any room on the track, as you can see, which is a little bit of a drag there. It kind of is a little bit of abrupt, but there's not much we can do about that. The other way that kind of jumps in like that, I would have liked to seen a little bit more of a little bit of space in the beginning. We could have done something a little clever there, but all I'm really doing is putting a small little fade on it to help it so it doesn't sound so abrupt. It's a little too much. So you'll have to play with that on your mix, but that's that's something we don't need to worry about too much here in this particular session.
I won't change just to suit you. I see me running through the hayfield. I always thought I'd never lose you. I won't change just to suit you. I see me running through the hayfields. I won't change just to suit you. I always thought I'd never lose you. I won't change just to suit you.
Okay, so we just balanced the track. It sounds pretty good now, the background vocals. Until we get the lead vocals in there, we won't know how we want those background vocals volume-wise to sit with the lead vocal. We'll look at that in the next video. But you can see that we're not compressing very heavily here. We're still on our master fader running right around -6, -7 dB, which is where we want to end up. Remember, we talked about at the beginning when we gain stage, we stayed around a -10, -12. And by the time we get to the end of the mix, which we're almost there, we're around a -6, -7, -5 at the most. That gives us plenty of room for mastering. And we're pretty much right on target there, and everything is starting to sound pretty good. So once we get the lead vocal in there and get everything kind of balanced, then we're going to go back and we're going to take a look at adding some additional processing like we talked about earlier in this session or in this series, and then we'll move on to parallel compression, go from there, and then we'll start to tie up this mix. So come on back for the next section and we will take a look at now the lead vocal in the verse and in the chorus.